"Don't get in that helicopter." The shout didn't just cut through the air, it shattered it. Raymond Langston flinched, his hand already gripping the door handle of his Bell 429. The turbine behind him was howling, the rotors spinning faster with every second. The airfield rumbled with noise, but that voice, young, cracked, desperate, somehow pierced through it all. He turned sharply. A girl, barefoot, small, no more than 10, was sprinting straight toward him across the tarmac. Her legs were thin, kicking up dust with each step, and her shirt, once pink, now dulled to a dusty rose, was torn wide at the shoulder. The hem flapped in the wind. Her jeans were frayed. She looked like she'd been running a long way, maybe longer than just across the field. Raymond stepped away from the aircraft, instinctively raising his arm to halt the pilot. "Hold," he called over the comm the helicopter's rotors thundered on, but the pilot caught his signal and eased the throttle back. The turbine began to wind down, the blades gradually slowing. The girl was close now, close enough that he could see the sweat running down her forehead, the whites of her eyes wide with urgency. "Stop. Please don't go," she gasped, breathless. "They did something to it." Raymond raised his hand, palm out. "Slow down. Who are you talking about?" She pointed straight past him. His heart jolted. Just 20 feet behind him stood two men, his ground security detail, lean, dark-suited, silent behind their sunglasses. They hadn't moved an inch since escorting him onto the field, but the girl's finger trembled as she pointed again. "I saw them," she said. "Or two guys just like them. Same suits, same build. Last night near the fence, they opened something underneath the chopper. I saw it. I swear I did." Raymond turned toward the men. One of them, Gregson, the taller one, raised an eyebrow under his shades, puzzled. The other shifted his weight uneasily. "Sir, we've been with you all morning," Gregson said calmly. "You know that." Raymond didn't answer right away. He looked back at the girl. She was panting now, arms limp at her sides, but still standing, still watching the helicopter like it might explode. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Maya," she whispered. "Maya William." Her voice cracked on her last word. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Raymond glanced between her, the chopper, and his men. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't the girl's tears. She wasn't trying to get attention. She wasn't clinging or begging. It was the precision of her fear. The specificity. "Curtis." He barked into his phone. "Diagnostic sweep. Tail number 114. RJ, focus on the undercarriage and NAV systems." "Sir, now." Raymond looked back at Maya. "You saw them touch the helicopter?" She nodded. "I thought they were mechanics until I saw them cut something and put a black box inside." "Where were you?" "I live near the dumpsters with my grandma." "We don't bother anyone." I couldn't sleep. I was out late collecting bottles." Raymond stared at her. Her feet were bleeding, barefoot on sun-baked tarmac. One knee was scraped raw, but she stood tall. The wind picked up. One of the rotor blades made a slow, tired creak overhead. Behind them, the helicopter sat still and quiet, waiting, and he made his decision. "Come with me," he said, gesturing for Maya to follow inside the terminal. As the doors shut behind them and the noise faded, Raymond walked her past the confused receptionist and straight to the maintenance office. She sat on the edge of a wooden bench, arms wrapped around herself, silent. An hour passed. Curtis returned. "Please, sir," he said quietly, handing over a diagnostic tablet. "We found something." Raymond's jaw locked as he scanned the readout. A signal disruptor, expertly embedded near the flight computer, hidden in such a way it would have activated 10 minutes into the flight, just far enough out to lose comms and blame pilot error. He slowly looked over at Maya. She didn't smile, didn't move. She simply said, "I'm glad you didn't go." Outside, the rotors groaned to a stop. And for the first time in decades, Raymond Langston, billionaire, builder, master of control, realized a child's scream had just saved his life. Sometimes it's not power or wealth that changes a life, but the quiet courage of a child who dares to speak up. If this moment touched something deep within you, leave a like to honor Maya's bravery. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching this story from in the comments below. You might be surprised who else nearby is watching with you. Brought to you by BUP Stories. The maintenance office smelled faintly of machine oil and old coffee. Raymond Langston stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the silent chopper outside. Maya sat behind him, still on the edge of the bench where he'd left her. She hadn't moved much, just sipped the cocoa the receptionist had quietly handed her earlier, though the cup was still mostly full, growing cold in her hands. Curtis, the hangar supervisor, stepped in again, eyes tense. "We pulled the security footage from last night, sir," he said, voice low. The time block she mentioned. There's a blacked out section. 27 minutes of complete visual loss. Never happened before. Raymond turned slowly. Was it internal failure? Curtis shook his head. No, sir. This was a manual loop insertion. Someone overrode the feed. Raymond took a breath through his nose, the familiar weight of calculations settling in his chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. How many people had access to the aircraft in the last 48 hours? He asked. 6, Curtis replied. 2 mechanics, yourself, your assistant, and those 2 gentlemen from security, Gregson and Hall. Raymond's jaw tightened. He glanced over at Maya. She was now looking up, eyes flicking between the 2 men standing guard outside the window. Same black suits, same stone faces. She spoke, her voice soft. They looked just like them. Raymond turned. You sure? Maya nodded slowly. They didn't say anything, but one of them, he wore gloves, black leather. It was warm out. I thought that was weird. Raymond blinked. That detail struck him harder than he expected. Gregson had a habit. Always wore gloves, even when unnecessary. It was a quirk, one he never questioned until now. Curtis, he said without turning. Escort Maya to the lounge. Keep someone with her at all times. And I want her grandmother found. Quietly bring her here under protection. Yes, sir. Raymond waited until the door clicked shut before finally walking over to his desk and pulling out a secure tablet. Within moments, he was inside his encrypted files, details of every contract, every NDA, every deal pending. And there it was, the bid for the new federal GPS-integrated aviation system. The one Aerogen Dynamics had been circling like vultures for months. A deal worth hundreds of millions. A deal Raymond's tech was set to win if nothing went wrong. And crashing mid-test flight that would have destroyed everything. A light knock came at the door. It was Hall, the shorter of the 2 security men. Everything all right, Mr. Langston? Raymond looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, he noticed how rehearsed the man's calm was. Too even, too mechanical. Fine, Raymond replied flatly. Get Gregson in here. Hall nodded and left. 30 seconds later, Gregson stepped inside. He moved with the same self-assurance as always, like a man who owned every hallway he walked down. Raymond motioned to the chair across from him. Sit. Gregson obeyed, but said nothing. Raymond placed the tablet between them. Screen on. It displayed the schematic of the flight system, highlighting the tampered component. You recognize that? Gregson barely glanced. Number she does, Raymond said, voice quiet. The girl. She saw it. Saw who installed it. Gregson's lip twitched just slightly. Raymond leaned forward. Let me tell you what bothers me. Last week, you asked for access to the hangar during off hours. You said you left your cufflink in my backup jet. Then you sent Hall in. Not yourself. Gregson shrugged. He had dinner plans. Raymond didn't blink. That night, the log showed someone using a manual override on the camera system. Then yesterday, you called in sick, yet showed up on site anyway. Spoke to no one. Didn't sign in. Gregson's face remained unreadable, but there was a twitch in the jaw. Tiny, but real. You're a loyal man, Raymond said, or so I thought. A long silence followed. Finally, Gregson broke it. You don't have proof. Raymond stood slowly. Not yet, but I have instinct. And a little girl who risked everything to shout the truth. He moved to the door and opened it. 2 federal agents stepped inside, badges out. Gregson didn't fight. He simply stood, nodded once, and followed them out. Raymond exhaled, then walked back to the window. Outside, Maya stood near the vending machine. A warm towel draped around her shoulders. A woman, her grandmother no doubt, was now at her side, hugging her tight. Curtis walked up behind him. How'd she know? She watches everything. Raymond murmured. When no one else does. Curtis paused, then asked. What now? Raymond looked at the chopper once more. Now we follow the trail all the way to Aerogen. Behind him, the hum of conversation resumed, distant. But Raymond didn't move. He was thinking of Maya's bare feet pounding the pavement. The voice that cut through machines. And somewhere deeper, beneath all the silence and suspicion, a truth echoed. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the heaviest weight, and sometimes it's the only thing that keeps a man like him from falling. He would not ignore it again, brought to you by BUP Stories. The maintenance office smelled faintly of machine oil and old coffee. Raymond Langston stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes locked on the now silent Bell 429 outside. The rotors had stilled, but his thoughts spun faster than ever. Behind him, Maya still sat on the edge of the bench where he'd placed her. Quiet, hands wrapped around a paper cup of cocoa she hadn't touched. Curtis, the hangar supervisor, entered again, tension lining his voice. We pulled the footage from last night, sir, he said carefully. The window she mentioned, about 1:15 to 1:42 a.m. It's blank, completely. 27 minutes of nothing. That system has triple redundancy. Raymond turned. So someone wiped it or inserted a pre-recorded loop. This wasn't an accident, Mr. Langston. Who had access? 6 people, Curtis said. You, your assistant, 2 maintenance crew, and the 2 security contractors, Gregson and Hall. Raymond glanced at Maya, who had just raised her eyes from the floor. She looked at the tinted glass behind which 2 men still stood silently. Gregson and Hall. Her voice was soft but clear. It was 2 guys built like them. Same walk, same shape. One of them wore gloves, black leather. Raymond narrowed his eyes. Gregson always wore gloves. It was part of his image, or so Raymond had assumed. He stepped to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a secure tablet. His fingers moved quickly through encrypted files, active projects, federal bids, internal risk memos, the centerpiece of it all, his company's pending contract with the U.S. Department of Transportation to overhaul GPS-based aviation control, a $900 million deal, and the one firm standing in his way, Aerogen Dynamics. This wasn't sabotage for sport. This was business. He tapped a button on the desk intercom. Curtis, move Maya to the staff lounge. Keep someone with her at all times. Quietly locate her grandmother. Bring her here under protection. No press. Yes, sir. The door closed behind them. Raymond turned back to the window, face like carved stone. Hall, he called through the open door. Send Gregson in. Less than a minute later, Gregson stepped in, closing the door behind him. You needed me, sir. Sit. Gregson did as instructed, his posture firm. Calm, too calm. Raymond set the tablet down on the table between them. It displayed the diagram of the flight computer and a highlighted module under the co-pilot panel. You recognize that? Gregson glanced at it. Not particularly. She does, Raymond said. The girl, she described what went in there. Described it perfectly, including the 2 men who installed it. Gregson's jaw shifted slightly, but he said nothing. Raymond leaned forward, voice steady. You came to me 3 years ago. Said you wanted loyalty over paycheck. Said you respected men who built things instead of bought them. I meant it, Gregson replied. Then tell me who paid you to destroy me. Gregson didn't flinch. But something in his gaze went dull. The performance had ended. Raymond stood slowly. Was it Aerogen? Gregson finally looked away. I don't know names. I was just told to make the flight go down. No questions. Who told you? A man named Cale. Cale Withers. He didn't come directly. It was routed through a private logistics firm, First Air Secure Ops. Shell contracts. They paid in crypto. No trace. Raymond studied him. Do you know what that girl saw last night? Gregson said nothing. She saw the end of me, Gregson. And she shouted anyway. Raymond pressed a button under his desk. The office door opened instantly. 2 plainclothes agents entered, displaying federal badges. Mr. Langston, one of them nodded. I'd like to report a domestic aviation sabotage attempt, Raymond said calmly. The man sitting here can start you off. Gregson didn't resist. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked out with the agents without a word. Raymond turned back to the window. Outside, Maya was now wrapped in a clean towel. Her grandmother holding her close. They stood near the vending machine, untouched by the chaos unfolding inside. The girl looked tired, but unshaken. Her eyes met his, even from across the glass. Curtis walked in quietly behind him. Sir, what do you want to do now? Raymond didn't look away. I want a full background check on Cale Withers, and I want federal eyes on every vendor connected to Aerogen within the last 6 months. Already started, Curtis replied. And Curtis, Raymond paused. I want Maya and her grandmother safe. Not just today, every day. Under our protection, no exceptions. Curtis nodded and left. Raymond remained by the window for a long while, hands in his pockets, jaw set. That morning, he'd planned to fly for clarity, to escape the pressure. Instead, a barefoot girl with a torn shoulder seam had shouted him back to life. And now, for the first time in years, he felt something like purpose. Not just to win, not just to retaliate, but to listen, to watch, like she had. Because the rotors might have spun, the machine might have launched, but thanks to her, he was still here, brought to you by BUP Stories. It was nearly dusk when Raymond Langston returned to his penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, but the view barely registered in his mind. His thoughts were elsewhere, still back on the tarmac, still hearing Maya's scream echoing beneath the whir of helicopter blades. He loosened his tie and walked straight into his study. The room smelled faintly of aged leather and oak. Books lined one wall, but it was the safe behind the abstract painting that drew his attention. He keyed in the code and pulled out a slim black folder marked FT Navtech, Federal Bid, Eyes Only. It held more than blueprints. It held the future of air travel. The next-generation GPS integration system his company had spent 5 years perfecting, an adaptive system that would make mid-air collisions nearly impossible. He'd been confident it would beat Aerogen's proposal hands down until now. Until they tried to kill him. He laid the folder on the desk, then tapped his private line. The screen lit up with the face of Special Agent Lorraine Greer, a contact he trusted within the Federal Aviation Investigations Unit. She was in her mid-50s, sharp and seasoned, one of the few people he knew who didn't shrink in the presence of power. "You're late calling," she said without preamble. "They made a move," he replied. "They used one of my own men, Gregson," he confessed. "And gave me a name, Cale Withers. Logistics contractor. You heard of him?" There was a pause, her brow furrowed. "Not in any official capacity, but I've seen that name show up around DC quietly. Defense contracts, offshore routing, never stays attached long. I need a full federal investigation. Quiet, discreet, no leaks. You understand what you're asking, Raymond?" This isn't corporate espionage anymore. This is attempted murder. I'm aware. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. Do you have the girl secured? Yes, her name's Maya William, 10 years old. Lives with her grandmother in Richmond. She's the reason I'm still breathing. Agent Greer softened for just a second. That takes guts. Speaking out the way she did, especially for a kid with nothing. She doesn't have nothing, Raymond said quietly. She has eyes and a voice. Greer nodded. Send me everything you have. I'll run it from my end. Raymond ended the call and sat down, his shoulders heavy, his breath caught somewhere between guilt and resolve. He looked across the room where the city lights flickered to life like fireflies. But the real spark, the one that mattered, had come from that girl, the child no one had seen, no one had guarded, and yet somehow she had guarded him. The next morning, Maya sat in the back of a black Suburban with tinted windows, her eyes wide as they pulled into the downtown offices of Langston Aerospace Systems. She wore clean clothes now, jeans without holes, a navy blue hoodie without tears, and small sneakers that lit up when she walked. She held her grandmother's hand tightly. Are we in trouble? She whispered. Raymond stepped out of the building's glass doors before anyone else could respond. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves. He smiled gently. Not at all. You're guests. And more than that, you're the reason we're standing here. He led them into the building, past the curious glances of executives and assistants who tried not to stare. Maya's footsteps echoed in the marble-floored atrium. The building's vastness overwhelmed her, but she didn't let go of her grandmother's hand. They reached a private conference room where Lorraine Greer was waiting. She shook hands with Raymond, then knelt slightly to Maya's level. You remember what you saw, sweetheart? She asked kindly. May not. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to ask you a few questions. And if you remember anything, even small stuff, it helps. All right. Maya glanced at Raymond, then back to Greer. Okay. They reviewed everything, the SUV, the gloves, the metal case the man carried, the party unlatched under the helicopter, the quiet words they spoke. Maya even remembered the logo stitched onto the back of one man's shirt. Gigatra Solutions. Lorraine exchanged a glance with Raymond. Gigatra's a subsidiary of Aerogen, their logistics arm. Raymond exhaled slowly. So, this confirms it. It connects them. Greer corrected. It doesn't convict them. Not yet, but we're close. He nodded. As the interview ended, Maya sat quietly beside a large model of an aircraft mounted in the corner of the room. Her fingers traced its wings gently. Raymond watched her, then approached. You did more than most adults would have done, he said. You didn't run away. You ran toward me. Why? She looked up, eyes steady. Because you were going to die and no one else was saying anything. He swallowed hard. Has that happened before? Seeing something bad and no one listens? She nodded. Sometimes at school, sometimes in the neighborhood. People don't look down, they look over. Raymond knelt beside her. Well, not anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pin, a miniature version of the Langston Aerospace crest, polished silver with a blue wing crossing a compass. He clipped it gently onto her hoodie. You're one of us now. Maya looked down at the pin, then back up. Even if I don't fly? You already did, he said. You just saved the pilot. And later that day, after escorting Maya and her grandmother home with full private security, Raymond stood once more at his office window. The clouds had gathered again over the city, heavy and low, like a storm still waiting. Curtis entered quietly. You ready to hit back, sir? Raymond turned, eyes sharper now, voice calm but resolved. I'm not hitting back. I'm building forward. He turned back toward the city where justice was slow and voices like Maya's were often lost. But this time, he promised himself hers would echo, brought to you by BUP Stories. By the time the sun dipped below the Golden Gate, Raymond Langston was already sitting inside a low-lit operations room beneath his company's headquarters, a rarely used sublevel wired directly into national satellite arrays, private servers, and encrypted surveillance archives. Most of his board didn't even know it existed. He stood before a large curved digital screen where frames from last night's security footage flickered, pausing every few seconds. Federal agent Lorraine Greer sat at the workstation beside him, scanning timestamp logs with narrowed eyes. "There," she muttered, zooming in. "Frame 4479. This blur right here only shows for a split second before the blackout kicks in." Raymond stepped closer. It was grainy, but enough. The silhouette of a man with a long case, barely visible against the backlight of a service truck. No face, no features, but the posture matched what Maya had described exactly. Same time she said she saw them. He confirmed. Greer nodded. "Now watch what happens next." She scrubbed forward. A sudden digital snowstorm filled the screen. The footage jumped, froze, then resumed 27 minutes later, clean and perfectly empty. Raymond shook his head. "Camera didn't malfunction. That's a manual loop insertion." "More than that," Greer added, tapping the screen. "They used something called a dead curtain, buries the metadata under dummy data. Only high-level contractors know how to deploy it. It's a signature technique." He turned sharply. "Whose signature?" Greer looked at him. "Gigatra. 3 previous aviation tampering incidents in the past 5 years. All erased the same way. Never went public. Never confirmed. But I've seen it before." "Huh?" Raymond clenched his jaw. "So this was never about sabotage. It was assassination." "No," she replied. "It was strategic erasure. They didn't want to destroy the aircraft. They wanted you to disappear inside it. That landed hard." Raymond turned away, staring at the far wall where a schematic of his Bell 429 flickered with highlighted danger zones. "Curtis said the sabotaged relay was wired into the GPS and AV system and secondary communication panel," Raymond murmured, "which means 5 minutes into the flight, I'd have been rerouted off course and radio silent somewhere over water." Greer added. "Where a mechanical failure narrative is easy to sell, where rescue response would have come too late to matter." Raymond moved to the side console and opened another file, a contract proposal from Aerogen Dynamics dated only 2 weeks prior, buried deep in the footnotes. He'd highlighted a clause marked Shared Testing Corridor Coordination, East Coast Facilities, the same corridor his test was scheduled to enter. He looked up. They were building a story. If I crashed, they'd step in with their system, claim ours was flawed, take the contract, own the future of civilian airspace. "Greedy and brutal," Greer said. "Classic playbook." Raymond exhaled slowly. His temples ached. "We can't go to the press yet. Not until we have a full chain, personnel, money, motive, methods. If we go public without proof, they'll counter with noise, discredit the girl, call this a smear." Greer nodded. "Agreed. Which means we go deeper. You've got any internal whistleblowers?" Raymond hesitated, then tapped into an archived employee log. One name blinked back at him. Peter Chen, a former systems analyst who had left abruptly 8 months ago. The departure had been labeled as a personal exit, but something had never sat right with it. "He worked on our first-gen NEVI relay," Raymond said. "Knew everything about the wiring. Never took an offer from Aerogen, but I suspect he was approached." Greer's eyes narrowed. "Where is he now?" "Sacramento. Last address we have is a P.O. box, but I'll find him." That night, Raymond made the drive himself. He hated Sacramento traffic, too slow, too indecisive, but the anonymity of driving alone calmed his nerves. When he arrived at the industrial block listed on Chen's personnel file, he found a rundown co-working building with a flickering sign and a broken mailbox labeled simply PC. Raymond knocked once. No answer. Then, from behind a cracked door down the hall, a voice murmured, "I didn't think you'd come yourself." Raymond turned. Peter Chen stepped into the corridor older than Raymond remembered, with darker circles under his eyes and a tightness in his posture that hadn't been there before. "I heard about the incident," Chen said. "Figured they'd move on you sooner or later." Raymond approached slowly. "Then you know who they are?" Chen hesitated, then nodded. "They came to me a year ago, said they wanted technical insight for future compliance coordination. Offered me 10 times my salary and a non-disclosure that basically read like a contract for silence." "And you turned it down?" "I walked away. Thought that was the end of it." He lowered his voice. "But 6 months ago, my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Just my old company laptop gone. I hadn't even used it in a year." Raymond's pulse quickened. "You still have access to the central blueprint archives?" Chen pulled a hard drive from his coat pocket. "Not anymore, but I made a mirror copy before I resigned. You'll find the first schematic for the tamper point, the same one they exploited." Raymond took the drive and looked him in the eye. "Why give it to me now?" Chen looked away. "Because I saw the girl on the news. That shout, that was braver than anything I ever did. I owe her." Back in San Francisco, Raymond handed the drive to Greer. Her team began decrypting it immediately. 2 hours later, one of her techs lifted his head. "Ma'am, we found an embedded contractor name in the original patch code." "Who?" The tech turned the screen. It read, "Withers C Protocol Lock, Access Level 9. Greer looked at Raymond. "We've got our man, and now we're going to find who gave him the key." Raymond leaned back in the chair. For the first time since that scream on the runway, he felt the wind shift. It wasn't over. Not yet, but the truth was no longer hidden, and he was no longer alone. Brought to you by BUP Stories. The morning fog curled low over the Langston Aerospace Testing Facility, veiling the hangars in a silvery shroud. Inside the executive conference room, the lights were dimmed and a 3D holographic model of the Bell 429 spun silently above the polished table. At its core, a red blinking mark pulsed beneath the co-pilot seat right where the sabotaged relay had been installed. Special Agent Lorraine Greer stood near the projection, arms crossed, while 2 federal analysts unpacked technical data from Peter Chen's mirrored drive. Raymond sat at the head of the table, unusually still, his fingers steepled under his chin. The technician spoke up, voice tight with awe and disgust. "We ran simulations using the altered GPS script from the drive. With the sabotaged module active, the helicopter's flight path would have diverted exactly 7 minutes after takeoff. Location, 40.2 miles offshore. No radar. No communication. A total blackout event." Raymond's stomach turned. Engine failure narrative would have been airtight. The backup recorder would have shut off 30 seconds after reroute. No distress call. No anomaly data. Greer gestured to the model. "It would have looked like a tragic mechanical fault. The kind that ends careers quietly." Raymond looked up. "And whose idea was it?" Greer turned to her analyst, who tapped into a folder tagged Withers C. "We matched the tampered code's ID with archived contractor logs from First Air Secure Ops Access Level 9. Only a few people had clearance to approve this type of deployment." She tapped the screen. A name appeared. Russell Kane, Vice President of Systems Integration, Aerogen Dynamics. Raymond let out a slow breath, deep and deliberate. "He signed the contract submission opposing mine 2 weeks ago." Greer's jaw tensed. "It gets worse. Kane submitted a request to expedite testing on Aerogen's backup guidance system on the same day you were scheduled to fly." Raymond leaned forward. "So if I crashed, they'd immediately pitch their system as a safer alternative, a public solution to a tragedy they engineered." "Precisely." Silence settled like weight on the room. Finally, Raymond stood and moved to the window where a small landing strip shimmered behind the veil of fog. Somewhere out there, Maya's voice still echoed in his memory. "They touched your helicopter." He turned back. "We need more than this. A direct link, financial, conversational. I want wire transfers, meeting records, something no one can explain away. Greer's phone buzzed. She glanced at the message, then raised her eyes. We may have it. One of my undercover analysts at First Air just intercepted a secure message flagged under Kane's internal login. It's a burner relay, but the signature lines match Wither's last known device. The content, she turned her phone so Raymond could read it. Test failed. Target survived. Initiate fallback protocol. No further contact until dust settles. Raymond read it twice, then a third time. Fallback protocol could mean retaliation or cover-up. Either way, they know you're alive and they know the operation failed. Raymond's expression darkened. That means Maya's at risk. Greer nodded. I've already doubled her detail, but we'll need to move her and her grandmother out of Richmond today. Raymond picked up the phone. No need. I'll bring them to the estate. It's off-grid, monitored 24/7. Nothing happens there without me knowing. That afternoon, under heavy escort, Maya and her grandmother arrived at Langston's private estate in Sonoma County. The compound sprawled across 80 acres, a fusion of sleek glass design and protective steel vanes. Nestled between vineyard slopes and forested edges, it was a place built not just for privacy, but for control. Maya stepped out of the SUV slowly, holding a paper notebook close to her chest. She scanned the quiet surroundings, the stillness in the air, the way even the birdsong seemed cautious. Raymond met her at the front steps, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. You're safe here, he said, and not just because of the walls. Maya gave a small nod, then looked up. Did you find out who they are? We're getting closer, he said. You helped more than you know. She hesitated, then opened her notebook and handed it to him. Inside were drawings, childlike but sharp. One sketch was of a man in a black cap with square shoulders placing something under a helicopter. Another was of a dark SUV and one more of Raymond standing next to her, his figure much taller but not imposing. Raymond flipped through the pages slowly, throat tightening. You remember details better than most of my engineers, he said. She shrugged. When no one listens to you, you learn to watch harder. That night, Greer called from the city. We just got confirmation, she said. Kane's phone pinged at a private terminal in Nevada. He's heading out of the country. We've already alerted Homeland and Interpol. He won't get far. Raymond walked out onto the patio, watching stars blink through gaps in the trees. And what about Withers? Still hiding, she replied. But once we bring Kane in, he'll crack. People like that never carry the whole plan. They're just hands paid to turn screws. Then let's make sure the whole machine is exposed, Raymond said. He ended the call and looked toward the guest house where Maya's light was still on. Inside she was drawing again, likely another piece of the puzzle no one else would think to see. A small voice had warned him. A small hand had pointed out giants in the shadows. And now under the stillness of night and the hum of hidden security lines running beneath the soil, Raymond Langston made himself a new kind of promise, not for contracts, not for power, not for revenge, but for the truth. And for the child who dared to speak it, brought to you by BUP Stories. 3 days later, Raymond Langston stood behind a velvet curtain, listening to the low hum of reporters, flashes of camera shutters, and the buzz of whispered speculation building inside the Langston Aerospace Grand Hall. It had been years since he held a press conference this size, years since he'd addressed the public directly. But this time, it wasn't about quarterly results or product launches. This time, it was personal. This time it was justice. Agent Greer stood beside him reviewing final notes with her earpiece in. Kane's been intercepted at Heathrow, she said quietly. Interpol has him in custody. Withers has gone dark, but now that the first domino's fallen, the rest will follow. Raymond nodded. Do we have enough? Between the hacked communication logs, Peter Chen's schematic archive, Maya's testimony, and Kane's travel logs, it's more than enough. We won't just convict them, we'll expose everything. The stage director gave the 2-minute signal. Raymond adjusted his cufflinks. Today, he wore no tie. His suit was charcoal gray, simple, understated, deliberate. He didn't want to look powerful. He wanted to look accountable. Across the stage, Maya stood with her grandmother in the wings, her hands folded nervously in front of her new blue cardigan. Her eyes flicked between the crowd and Raymond. He gave her a nod. She nodded back, stronger than her age should allow. The lights dimmed. The curtain rose. Raymond stepped into the spotlight. He walked to the podium with a calm, unhurried pace. Reporters murmured. Cameras clicked like 1,000 locusts. He let the silence stretch before speaking. 3 weeks ago, he began. I almost boarded a helicopter that never would have landed. A hooch fell. An internal navigation failure. They would have called it an accident, a tragedy, a simple pilot error. That's what the world would have heard. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But it wasn't an accident. It wasn't simple. And I'm standing here today because someone far braver than most decided not to stay silent. Ha! He turned slightly, gesturing to the side of the stage. Maya stepped forward slowly, her grandmother beside her. Gasps swept through the crowd as the cameras swiveled. She looked small, almost swallowed by the room. But when she stood beside Raymond, she didn't flinch. This is Maya William, he said. She's 10 years old. She's not an engineer. She's not a federal agent. She's a child who pays attention. A child who saw something and refused to look away. He looked back at the crowd. She saved my life. There was a beat of silence, then another, and then applause. Quiet at first, then building, cautious, but real. Raymond raised a hand to still the noise. I won't detail every part of the investigation here today. That work is ongoing. But what I will say is this. A team of corporate executives, contractors, and affiliates of Aerogen Dynamics attempted to eliminate me to secure control of a federal aviation contract. They rigged my aircraft. They planned for my disappearance and they failed because they underestimated the power of an unheard voice. He stepped back from the podium and knelt slightly beside Maya. Do you want to say anything? He asked. Maya glanced at her grandmother. Then at the sea of faces before her, her voice was small but clear. I didn't want him to die. That's all. A few people wiped their eyes. Raymond rose again. In Maya's honor and in the name of every unheard child who's ever seen something wrong and been too afraid to speak, today I'm announcing the creation of the Maya Watch Initiative, a program dedicated to equipping children in underrepresented communities with access to safety resources, digital literacy, and advocacy tools because paying attention should never go unrewarded. The applause this time was immediate and lasting. Later that afternoon, Raymond returned to the estate, emotionally exhausted, but sharper than he'd been in years. He stepped out onto the patio where Maya was seated beneath a large oak, sketching quietly. She looked up as he approached. You were amazing, he said, pulling up a chair beside her. She shrugged. I didn't say much. You didn't have to. The truth speaks loud on its own. She flipped her notebook to a new page. What happens now? We keep going, Raymond replied. They'll fight back. Try to bury it. Spin it. But the difference is this time we're not alone. You reminded me what watching really means, what listening means. She smiled faintly. Do you think I could be a pilot one day? Raymond smiled. I think you already are. You saved someone mid-flight. That's more than most pilots ever do. As the sun dipped behind the vineyard hills, a stillness fell over the land, not of fear, but of clarity. Behind them, the wind stirred the tall grass. Ahead of them, the noise of litigation and scandal would rise. But for now, in that quiet golden moment, a billionaire and a barefoot girl sat side by side, not as savior and saved, but as co-navigators of a truth no longer hidden. And this time, they were ready for whatever came next, brought to you by BUP Stories. The headlines the next morning roared like jet engines across every major network. Billionaire sabotage plot exposed. 10-year-old girl saves aviation tycoon from assassination. Aerogen executives under federal investigation. Raymond Langston sat at the long dining table in his estate's open kitchen, still in his robe, a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal beside him. He hadn't slept much. The press conference had triggered a tidal wave: public support, legal scrutiny, government intervention, and the flood was only rising. Curtis entered, tablet in hand, his expression a tight knot of urgency. "Sir, federal agents raided Aerogen's DC office this morning. They seized 15 terabytes of internal data and over 30 encrypted devices." Raymond nodded. "And Russell Kane, still in UK custody. Extradition pending. His lawyers are already pushing for a sealed deposition." Raymond leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Of course they are. They'll try to settle this in shadows." Curtis hesitated. "There's more. We just got word Cale Withers surfaced. He tried to flee through a private port in Baja, but was intercepted by Mexican authorities. He's being held quietly for now." Raymond's eyes sharpened. "Does he know about Maya?" Curtis shook his head. "Not unless someone told him. We've kept her name sealed behind federal firewalls and her location's been rotated across secure channels." "Good," Raymond muttered. "Keep it that way." Oh. Outside the window, the sun was rising over the vines, casting gold streaks across the hills. Maya sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a light blanket, sketching with a focused calm that belied the storm surrounding her. Her grandmother was inside preparing breakfast and humming softly hymns, mostly old ones that carried memory in every note. Raymond walked out and took the spot beside Maya. She looked up from her notebook and smiled faintly. "Drawn again?" he asked. She nodded. "This one's a bird, not flying, just watching." Raymond smiled, tilting his head. "What kind?" She paused. "I don't know, but I think it knows everything." He let that sit for a while. "Things are going to get noisier," he said gently. "People are going to say a lot of things about me, about what happened." "I know," she replied. "Grandma says they're going to twist stuff." She's right. But the truth doesn't change just because someone bends the way it's told. Maya flipped the page, drawing a long looping shape that curved like a trail. "Are they going to jail?" "Some of them," he said. "Some will fight, some will lie, but the chain's broken now and everyone's watching." She was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Why'd they want to hurt you?" Raymond stared at the horizon. "Because I was in the way. They wanted power, money, control, and I had something they needed to take to get it." Maya nodded as if she understood more than a 10-year-old should. "But they didn't get it." "No," he said. "Because of you." Later that day, Raymond returned to his downtown headquarters to meet with his executive board. The room was tense. Some wore expressions of awe. Others of quiet fear, worried about public backlash, legal exposure, investors pulling out. He stood at the head of the table. No slides, no charts, just a printed statement in his hands. "I know what you're thinking," he began. "Our stock price, our reputation, our contracts." He paused, scanning each face. "But I want to remind every single one of you, this company was almost used as a weapon. Our platform, our tech, our trust, all hijacked because we stopped paying attention to what didn't look dangerous, because we assumed that silence meant safety." He laid the statement down. "So from this day forward, we change how we operate. No more top-down only approvals. Every tech system goes through a double-layered audit. We launched the Maya protocol." A few board members exchanged confused glances. "What's the Maya protocol?" one of them asked. Raymond looked up. "An internal watchdog system, AI monitored but with human verification. It flags discrepancies, but more than that, it empowers low-tier employees to submit anonymous alerts. And every single alert will be reviewed at the executive level." One woman raised her brow. "You're going to base a company-wide protocol on a 10-year-old girl's warning?" Raymond didn't flinch. "She saw what we missed and saved my life. So, yes, I'm basing it on her." Because the day we stop believing that wisdom can come from the lowest rung is the day we invite collapse. Silence. Then slowly heads nodded. Not all, but enough. That evening, Maya stood at the edge of the estate garden, looking up at the first stars poking through the dusk. Her grandmother joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "You did good, baby," she whispered. Maya looked up. "Do you think I changed something?" Her grandmother smiled. "You changed everything." From the porch, Raymond watched them, the girl who saw in the dark, and he turned to Curtis, who stood beside him with a soft smile. "She's going to outgrow this place." "I hope so," Raymond replied. "That's the point." A gentle wind stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, a quiet sentinel of the night. And within that peace, the world shifted, not with noise, not with violence, but with the quiet certainty of a truth seen, spoken, and finally heard, brought to you by BUP Stories. The chapel at Langston Estate wasn't large. It wasn't even used much, just an old wood-framed building tucked between the vineyard rows and the southern tree line. It had no stained glass, no grand altar, no organ, but on this overcast morning, it held something far greater than ceremony. Raymond stood at the back of the room, adjusting the sleeves of his navy suit. He wasn't giving a speech today. This wasn't a press event. It was a private gathering, just staff, federal agents, a few colleagues, and a pair of chairs at the front, saved for two guests who didn't know why they were here yet. Maya and her grandmother entered quietly, escorted by Agent Greer herself. Maya wore a pale yellow dress, simple and clean, with white sneakers. Her hair was braided back neatly. A small silver pin, Raymond's company crest, clipped to the collar of her sweater. As the last guest settled, Greer stepped up to the lectern and cleared her throat. "We don't gather here today to remember what was lost," she began. "We gather to acknowledge what was prevented by someone most of the world wouldn't have seen coming." She turned toward Maya. "This child didn't just speak up. She changed the trajectory of an entire investigation, dismantled a conspiracy, and exposed a level of corruption that would have otherwise passed undetected. She showed courage that people twice, three times her age might not have found." Greer gestured toward the side and an assistant stepped forward with a framed certificate embossed with a golden seal. "In recognition of her bravery, integrity, and service to the public good, the Department of Transportation and the FAA hereby award Maya William the Civilian Medal of Federal Distinction." Gasps rippled through the room. Maya froze. She looked up at her grandmother, eyes wide. Raymond stepped forward, taking the frame from Greer's hands, then knelt and presented it to Maya. "You didn't just save me," he said, voice low enough only she could hear. "You reminded me what it means to see. Really see." Maya blinked back sudden tears. "I didn't mean to be brave," she whispered. "I don't think anyone ever does," Raymond replied gently. "But you were." The crowd stood and applauded, not in thunderous fashion, but in waves of warmth, genuine and unforced. Maya stood motionless for a moment, then slowly turned and faced them all. Her little shoulders squared, the metal gleaming softly against the fabric of her dress. After the ceremony, the estate's garden bloomed under the gray light. Guests wandered among lemon trees and rose vines, sipping tea and exchanging quiet words. Raymond walked beside Maya, both of them silent for a while. "I heard you're going back to school next week," he said. Maya nodded. "Grandma said it's time. Are you ready?" She looked up at him. "I think so. I mean, things feel different now, like I see stuff I didn't before." "That never goes away," Raymond said, smiling. "It's called awareness. It's a kind of strength." She paused. "Do you think people will believe me now? Like, when I speak?" Raymond looked out across the vineyard. "Some will, some won't. But the point isn't whether they believe you right away. The point is, you know what you saw, and you won't stop saying it just because it makes people uncomfortable." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "It's blank," he said. "For now. Thought maybe you'd want to start writing the rest of your story." She opened the cover, then glanced up. Do you want me to write about you? He chuckled softly. Only if I make it interesting. That afternoon, Raymond received a secure message from Agent Greer. The content was brief but final. Confirmed. Cale Withers confessed. Under oath, Russell Kane authorized the sabotage on behalf of Aerogen. Evidence matched. Prosecutors are preparing to file federal charges. Names will go public next week. The email ended with a single sentence. Sometimes the ones we walk past are the only ones who see where we're headed. Raymond stared at that line for a long time. Then he closed the message and looked out across the vineyard again. In the distance, Maya stood beneath the old oak tree near the garden's edge, sketching quietly with a colored pencil she'd found in his desk. She looked peaceful, focused, not as a hero, not as a survivor, but as a girl simply being herself again. Raymond's chest swelled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not relief, something deeper, clarity. Because in a world full of noise and power and headlines and contracts, it had been a single voice, cracked, young, uninvited, that had pierced the storm. She had shouted first, and the world was still listening, brought to you by BUP Stories.